afternoon. Welcome to Burning Issues. Burning Issues is a contemporary current affairs program that we do every week on IETV to talk about what are some of the burning issues affecting the lives of citizens of Trinidad and Tobago today. And for all intents and purposes, we know on a weekly basis there are many issues that impact upon the lives of citizens. We can't touch on all, but we could at least touch on some of them. And with my co-host, we'll talk about some of those burning issues today. So what are the burning issues for today, May the 3rd, 2022? Well, let's start with the headlines on the newspapers today. And the headlines in the newspapers today tells us that we have a problem with our children's homes. And the homes where children are being abused one way or the other. And it is a crisis. It's a crisis to some extent, and it bleeds our hearts to hear how some children are being treated when they were hoping and when there is the expectation that when they end up in some of these homes they would have some degree of protection and safety. We're going to talk a little bit more about that as we get into the show today. But apart from the burning issue with what has been happening at the children's homes, there are many other burning issues. So for instance, crime. And we have crime at different levels. So last weekend, not this weekend that just went, the weekend before, the Easter weekend, we had a significantly spike in our murder rates. And then during the course of last week, the murder rates did not go down. For all intents and purposes, probably since in the last 2 weeks, we probably have had over 3 deaths per day, 3 murders per day. And that's not acceptable. Clearly that is not acceptable. The police commissioner at the funeral service of one of his fallen officers told us, "I'm smiling beneath my mask because I know we will conquer this thing." But guess what? We, the population, not seeing it. And if we are not seeing it, then where does that leave us? We're living in fear. We don't know when the next attack will come and who it will come to and where it will come from. But we know, and we could only hope that, somebody told me, let them bad boys kill out themselves. But it doesn't only impact upon the bad boys, because there's something we've been told some years ago about collateral damage. And it's not only the bad boys who are being killed off, but some innocent people. And so that is an issue. But crime doesn't stop only with the murders. And we have seen it now with the reopening of schools. And nearly every day there's a video that is circulating on social media that tells us that the school children have gotten involved. And you know what is the terrible part about that? Last week I actually saw a video, not of secondary school students, but of primary school students getting involved in the fighting. And it is frightening the way the primary school children have followed the example set by their elders. And the question is, what are we going to do to stop this? There's been talk about we can't send police into school with guns. We can't send police into school with uniforms. But we have to talk a little bit more about how we could deal with that crime situation and the fights that are happening in school. The Prime Minister's excuses is that we are a violent society. My question to the Prime Minister is, when did we become a violent society? When did we become such a society that everybody resorts to violence? And I raise that question because I remember way back in 1990, some 30 years ago, I was in Jamaica for a conference. And I remember a Jamaican colleague telling us, he said, you see, all in Trinidad, if your neighbor have a quarrel in Trinidad, all they will just cuss each other up. But in Jamaica, when the neighbors have a quarrel, or my chicken gone in your yard and eating your plants, the first thing people look for is gun to shoot up each other. But that was 30 years ago. I don't know how many of you all recall 2 weeks or 3 weeks ago when somebody was using a brush cutter or a weed whacker or something and cut somebody's shadow benny's down, and the next thing the person got killed. So it has reached Trinidad. That behavior we talked about 30 years ago in Jamaica has reached Trinidad, and we have to ask ourselves, what can we do to stop it? We're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to also have to talk a little bit about the politics. I mean, I'm a political scientist. I can't get away from politics. And within the last week, we've seen a big launch of the PDP. In fact, they launched their party headquarters in Trinidad 2 weeks ago. And on the weekend, they had the PDP launch at the Hyatt. And then we had former police commissioner Gary Griffith launching the NTA and saying, come join me. And the question that begs here is simply, how do we treat with these new parties? Philip Alexander is there also, beating the ground every day. And we have several other parties, smaller parties. Anthony Williams from Point Fortin has been on. He's been on my show previously when we had elections 2020. And we have various small parties. Question, is there room for small parties? Will the third parties make a difference in Trinidad and Tobago? We're going to talk about that too. So we're going to talk about several of these issues after we take a break here on burning issues. We break now and we come back to talk about the issues. In Trinidad and Tobago, every week there's another issue. Another issue comes to the fore, which is a burning issue for citizens. And on IETV, we will be discussing some of these burning issues from a political point of view, from a social point of view. And then my co-host will also discuss the economic and the medical. Welcome to Burning Issues on IETV, and we will also invite you to participate in the discussions with us.
The economy impacts all of us. Join us weekly as we and our guests ventilate these burning issues.
Stay tuned for informative and exciting stuff.
Welcome back to Burning Issues. As I started at the introduction, the headlines in the newspapers today cries out about the shame that we have had in our children's homes. In several of the homes, I am yet to understand what exactly has happened in some of these homes. But the report is a damning report on our society, on our leadership, on our authorities. It's a crisis, a crying shame to say the least. And Dr. Bahal, maybe you would want to say exactly how you feel after having read some of those reports.
Well, I wanted to share my sentiments as well on this matter because I am really, I don't know what word to use, I'm really upset. Now, there are two sides to this matter, and here's where you can help me. We are talking about a report revealing information. But I am going to the step B of it, which is more important. Right now, I think there are some criminal acts that were committed over the years. And the police have to step in now to be able to address the situation. We can't have fracture, rape, torture, all these different things, and the police are not part of that to deal with it immediately. I am not in any way going to compromise what we are about to talk about in terms of how we can improve the running of these institutions. But right now, there are major criminal acts that went on there. And the government, the police, the acting commissioner shouldn't be waiting on any talk show host to tell him these are criminal acts. And he's supposed to step in there and explore and look for these culprits and put them in their appropriate place in terms of let the law take its course. So, what you're taking at? Are you thinking having another committee to investigate this problem and what we could do to improve it is enough? I don't think so. I think the police has to step in there now.
Well, clearly, criminal acts have been committed. And these children were placed in these homes. Some of them were placed by the courts, some of them by other institutions. And the children have been placed in the homes, supposedly to safeguard the children from the elements on the outside.
Correct.
But yet still, when they got into the homes, they faced rape, they faced torture, they faced beatings, cocktails,
So if these were being done, if I am the minister, I have a copy of this report, and I've heard these things. If I am not revealing that information immediately, wouldn't I be culpable as well as suppressing this information for so long?
Well, that is another issue. And you see, a lot of what we could say about what has happened here relates to what has been published in the media, whether the print media or the electronic media. One of the things, for instance, we kept hearing about in the electronic media was that some of these homes are unregistered. I don't know what that means, because as far as I'm concerned, all of these homes, all of these are institutions
and are being funded by
government. Are being funded by the state.
Yeah.
How could they not be registered?
That's choosing words in a way
exactly.
which I don't want to get involved with. Semantics is not my name here. I want to know why, if any reports have been coming in that people were being raped, people were being tortured, they had people with blows and had fracture. When these reports came in, were the police informed immediately about these incidences? Do we have to wait for so many years and for the minister to have a report in December or whenever, for she now to come 4 months down the road and now saying, where was the police called in? If I commit rape, they taking me in the morning to their cell phone. Why that was not done? And I'm sure this is not the only time reports were made. I also show that many times things were done and reports were not made. But a few times reports were made. What was done by these agencies, these homes, in terms of informing the police? I don't think so.
Well, I don't know. And I don't know, for instance, whether or not the minister has submitted a copy of that report to the police commissioner. I don't know whether the minister has submitted a copy of that report to the DPP, because clearly there have been breaches in the law. And we have to do something and make people accountable. And if you do the crime, you have to
face the consequences.
Face the consequence.
I want to ask another question, Raghunath. Now, when you are a child, under, I don't know, 15 years or 16 years, and you're in a way, your parents is in charge of you. If you do something wrong, the parent, if you have to get consent for something, the parent must sign any kind of things that has to be done. The parent is responsible. So in the same way, when a child is taken away from the home or wherever and put in the hand of the state is responsible for any sort of mishap. And they have to take both the legal thing and any economic issues, any social issues that may arise as a result of your negligence. Just how they want to charge parents for not making sure their children behave in a certain way because they are underage. the state has to pay for this as well. And if these things are going on, the state has a big cost to pay in terms of the economics, the social cost, psychological cost to these victims, because they were put in the responsibility of the state. If you can't do something, let go the children in the wide open. Like if you make that decision to bring birds in a cage, it is your responsibility, and I'm sure a lot of the animal activists would say so, to make sure these birds are properly fed, nurtured, and whatnot. If you can't do it, let go them, let the universe take care of them. But you can't have people in a home, and you as the state took the responsibility. You sign a document, I want Mr. Harry or Mary or whoever to come in that home. And you have I wouldn't even say you neglected. You have gone beyond neglect. You have allowed these students to be tortured in a serious manner. So therefore, you as the state, just as a parent, would have to pay that cost. Right?
But and you see, this is where the problem comes in. This is where the problem comes, because we are talking about children, and we ask ourselves, children have rights, or we hear that all the time. But unfortunately, they have rights, but they may not have advocates, people who will advocate for their rights. So, for instance, yes, they've been placed in a home, and whatever happens in the home, when the children, who does the children go and complain to? Are there avenues for them to raise their concerns? Are there mechanisms that, should they raise their concerns, that these are going to be taken seriously? In many instances, these children are voiceless, are without a voice, and even if they go and make a complaint, then the issue arises, is children they lying?
Yeah. In fact, some people did comment that they're not taken seriously. What hurt me more, there's yesterday, staff encouraging a culture of abuse. So if the staff is doing it, the very people who are meant to be their guardian, them is the one actually doing the abuse, encouraging the abuse, then I'm really sorry for these children. These children, quite frankly, if that is going on, there has to be an immediate number of volunteers to go in there and take over control of all these institutions immediately. We cannot wait for a report. The information here is staff encouraging a culture of abuse. So how could you have these very staff being present while this report is being prepared? No. It's like an emergency. In fact, this lady, Ayana Webster Roy, said it's an urgent business. Of course, she had the reports in December. I don't know why she took so long. But having said so now, urgency means like now. This is a critical state. People are being, you can't have a rape victim in the same area where the abuser is. So right now, as we speak, the ministry has to take control, bring in about 40 volunteers who are willing to put their time and effort. And of course, I don't have no faith in people saying, I'm going to be resilient, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. We hear that from the political platforms. I want to see everything that is being done on the radar. You measure and you monitor. And every single volunteer who goes in there now, we're going to measure, we're going to monitor what you're doing, so we can make reasonable scientific intervention into the management. So all these abusive people, I mean, look, how you can have a house of horror, right? Houses of horror, and you're going to wait for 2 months before you get a report and then work on it. No way, that cannot happen. I mean, we all know children, they are the future of the nation. The children themselves, they are not in charge of themselves. When you're born, 1 year, 2 years, we're all trying to nurture them in a proper way. We are given the responsibility as a state to be in charge of these houses. Make sure you deal with it. If I have a child, if somebody in my home and I'm abusing the child, I expect the state to take the child away from me, but not to put them by the next abuser. So therefore, we as a society, we need to deal with this head on. We as citizens of this country should not allow these children to, it can be our children, my children, yours. So if they are there right now, we can't have the abusers. And we have gotten this from the report. I haven't read the full report. The report called for a children's commissioner. What? I mean, we have heard about reports from before, and after the report being said, they will say, no one took charge. You know, so I don't hear about commissioner now. Right now, we have people are being abused. We have to get people to go there. In fact, we should do like what they do in Marabella Health Office when something happened there, and they took all the staff, every single staff, and move them out and put them to a different health office and bring in new staff. That should be done immediately in those houses.
So clearly, that's a function for two institutions: the Children's Authority as well as the Ministry of responsible for.
Yep. The Children's Authority should, and the Police Commissioner.
And we must include the Police Commissioner in that.
Three major institutions. The Police Commissioner should have stepped in there now. He mightn't be able to find the culprit, but at least he should step in and now start the process of the investigation. And secondly, the Ministry of Social Development. They're supposed to have a battery of people coming in there now and replacing it. That's exactly what they do for a much lesser evil that went on in Marabella Health Office a couple of years ago, where they took the old staff and removed them and bring in a new staff. This, what we're seeing here, is much more abusive than what took place in Marabella Health Office. So therefore, we expect the minister to remove all that staff and bring in. Don't tell me where you're going to get them, not like the DPP. You have to find a way, but you can't have the victims there and the abusers. No, we can't.
So, okay, so we need to have measures put in place immediately. We cannot simply delay this anymore.
Absolutely, you're on the ball.
Okay.
Go to the head of the class for that, immediately. We don't want no delay.
And this is the challenge that we have in Trinidad and Tobago today. And we talk about burning issues. I mean, when we ask ourselves, how many things get done immediately? Where's the immediacy in doing certain things? And it just doesn't come. It comes at its own time. And that's a real challenge for us. When we talk about that, for instance, we talk about the children and the abuse that the children are facing in the homes, and that's a serious matter. We need also to talk a little bit about the children and the fighting and the school fights. We're going to come back to after a short break and talk about that. So let's take a break now and come back and talk about children and school fights. In Trinidad and Tobago, every week there's another issue. Another issue comes to the fore, which is a burning issue for citizens. And on IETV, we will be discussing some of these burning issues from a political point of view, from a social point of view. And then my co-host will also discuss the economic and the medical. Welcome to Burning Issues on IETV. And we will also invite you to participate in the discussions with us.
The economy impacts all of us. Join us weekly as we and our guests ventilate these burning issues.
Stay tuned for informative and exciting stuff.
Welcome back to Burning Issues. So we're talking about the problem with children. And the problem with children, yes, we have the horrors in the homes. And when we say homes here, we're talking about the horrors in the homes as relates to the children's homes that are managed by the Ministry of Gender Affairs and Children, as well as the Children's Authority. But we also need to talk about children in the home. And here we're talking about the private homes. And we have to ask ourselves what is happening in the homes that has now resulted in the fact that on a daily basis we are recording children having fights in schools and on the way to schools. And in many instances, well, I shouldn't say many, but in several instances, they have included adults in these fights. We saw last week, in fact, I remember on another media, where there was actually the recording where a child literally was on the ground and another jumped from many feet away in a way to stamp and pile drive that child further into the ground. And I remember, I think it was Inspector or Superintendent Alexander actually saying he will hope that the parents of the child who was on the ground and who suffered that attack would make a report to the police. Now, until today, we don't know, because again, if children attacked or whatever as it relates to children, their names are not published in the newspapers or in the media, and we don't know whether or not they have actually done so. But the point about it is that we have reached this crisis situation. We've reached a crisis situation where every day, literally, there are fights. And as I said earlier, it is not only at the secondary school level. It has now gone down to the primary school level. So Dr. Bahal, tell me, what are we doing wrong? What have we done wrong? Is it a problem that our generation has created for this generation?
I want you to stick up in there for a moment, right? I want to come back to that. If you have a child and you want them to eat healthy, but every day you pack snacks, biscuits and chocolate and all these things in that bag, do you expect that child to be eating healthy?
Well, obviously, if you are giving the child unhealthy stuff.
So we are creating an environment. And I want to kind of look at it from a public health model. We are creating an environment. You see, that's the home that that took the responsibility to take care of children. Those people who are taking care of dysfunctional people, they need to be helped. In the same way, our society, I feel that the environment, both the physical and the social environment, sometimes we're building, is kind of in a way, I used that term before, it can either be a crucible or a cradle in the development of someone. And my own feeling is that our environment is like a crucible, it's frying up our people. What is it in the environment? That's the question you're posing to me. What is it in the environment that creating that person to behave this kind of violence is like a health problem, eh? You're getting chopped, you're getting this, you're getting that. It's a health hazard. So therefore, we have to look at just how in heart disease, you have sugar, pressure, cholesterol, smoking, alcohol, overweight, sedentary lifestyle, all those things in the environment. We have no playground, plenty bars, plenty fast food. So you expect now to develop these risk factors. So maybe in this environment, we have a situation where the children picking up certain stimuli, which making them have these tendencies. What exactly these stimuli are, whether it's because of poor parenting, whether it's because of no money, whether we're seeing a big inequity in the country, where some people could lavish on a $2,000 meal and another one can't get $2 to buy a biscuit. You know, by seeing that, I'm grinding as a young adult, 14 years, 18 years or 19 years, I'm seeing this marked discrepancy. Why all this? So all these inequities taking place in front of my eye, just passing through there. I starved to death and a person could just have all that. So in other words, there are a number of things in this environment. What specifics they are, we could go into all that, but it would take a lot of time. All the public health books could tell you that we have an environment which we could create a violent person. Every little thing, just looking at the government alone could make you feel, look, why we always have to keep talking? We are not always in a survival mode, struggling for survival, which is 70% of the population. The other 30% feel they could do what they want and get away. They could control everything. So, and I feel that is maybe is where that, according to the public health model, this primary level, the public health aspect, we are having this environment which encouraging that. You know?
Okay.
I mean, of course, after you fail in your public health model, by having nice roads and drainage, and look, I passing through the road, garbage all over the place, and you know, everybody fighting the gap park on the pavement. And I mean, what exactly our society is doing? So when we're fighting the gap park on the pavement, you could imagine where we have come from. When I have to fight the glass of water, I mean, I have no this and no that. Everything is one chaos in that environment. So when we have these tendencies now, we go in school without food, and a friend might have some lunch, you fight for it. And that is how we end up getting the secondary part now, where you're seeing these students making a little fight. But when we tackle this here, according to our Commissioner of Police, we reach the point of, after public health and secondary level, we go into the tertiary level where we're going to attack this crime. We go into the level where they commit murder and rape, like what took place in these schools. We didn't look at it before to see if the environment was nurturing or creating these kind of problems. We wait till, and now the Commissioner of Police vow to conquer evil. How are you going to conquer evil? You say that for the last decades. Police can't, the very police involved in this probing police, you know. So let the facts speak. The facts are there that the police are unable to solve the crime, but they're attacking it from the tertiary level, the level when you're done committed.
But okay, hold on. You see, this has been one of my challenges, and I hear you when we're talking about that you're tackling it at the level where there's a crime, and of course the alternate to that is simply we go to some of the other people have been saying. Well, you know what? All they're not dealing with the socio-cultural issues and the grassroots and the poverty and everything else. And I have a little problem with that. And I will say this. I have a problem with this whenever somebody use the excuse and tell us that is poverty has caused us to reach in this situation. And because we're not dealing with poverty, no, I say that simply because when we go back in our own history, the majority of people who came out and who grew up in the 70s and 80s and 90s were not rich people. They were poor people. But they didn't turn to crime the way our young people today are turning to crime. So we have to be careful that we don't simply give it away and say, blame everything on the socioeconomic situation.
We're not blaming, but I could tell you, at least 90% of that environment, what the environment contributes, could lead you to making you a criminal.
But you see,
but that don't mean that should you do an act, we're going to look for the etiology and say, well, that causes, so therefore that you go scot-free. No. But if once you commit a crime, you have to deal with it according to the law. But while we're trying to sort this out, it's like there's a nice story of this people drowning in the river. I mentioned that before, they're drowning. So they build one tent, they put up a hospital, people drowning, more and more people, like resuscitation equipment, more doctors, more this, more that, more everything. But nobody chose to walk up the river and realize that somebody was pushing down people down the river. So once you stop that process, you can have less people down here who drown and that require help. So we're looking at it from the point of where people are already committing these things. We're not saying we shouldn't help these people with a heart attack and all these criminal elements like, you know, suicide and rape. We have to deal with it. But we have to spend a big part of our budget, a major part, looking at what's happening up the road to see what is happening in our environment. You see, if we don't do that, we're going to be spending all our resources in trying to plug holes and not deal with the actual source of the problem, which I agree with you. It may not explain everything. It's a very complex, dimensional aspect of what contributes to the crime or make you a criminal. So it's not simplistic, but we have to try all different methods. We can't use the last time at the very end, and that's what we're doing in Trinidad. We always keep using, looking for these criminals, and they can't find none.
Well, you see, and that's part of the real challenge. Now, you see, we started off talking about crime and fights and so on. But we have to bear in mind that we have different levels of society and different strata in society. And different strata exhibit different types of activities, not all of which are what we want. So, all right, so let me explain what I mean. It's easy for us to talk about the children fighting. And, you know, the argument has been put forward outside there to some extent. These things are more happening in the government schools, not in the denominational schools, where there's greater discipline and so forth. And that might be so, you know. That might be so, that you may have greater discipline in the denominational schools and you don't have the fights. But that doesn't mean to say that the denominational schools don't have their own challenges and problems.
Remember to the school children who attend these so-called schools that have a bigger name.
The prestige schools.
Prestige schools. They are more selective. When you're choosing as a principal that cohort of patients, they marks in the 90s or the 80s. So you find these students tend to be of our students already in a way of a class that doesn't have that violent nature, maybe. And the ones who go to the junior sec, don't think, I'm sure if those same schools, those children in those schools go to the denominational schools, they will still be fighting there. Because that's partly because of what took place before in their home and in their communities. But I don't think the denominational school per se or the prestige school is responsible for any better behavior. They may complement it and even make it better. But if you have that tendency in the home without food and clothes and proper parenting and poverty and all these things, and you come in the denominational schools, I am sure you might have to end up in a fight as well. It has to be looking at the end of the road to see, look, who already committed this crime. I think Mr. Manning has spoke about the boot camp, to look at those people, students who are committing these things, put them in an area where they have a more rigidity in enforcement of discipline and whatnot, together with rehabilitation. That's the boot camp. But how it was sold, maybe it didn't come off clearly across the nation.
So, all right, so this brings us to the real crux of the matter. We have a problem.
Yes.
We have a problem. Children are misbehaving in school at all levels, all strata of the society. What are our options as at this point in time? Now, I have heard the comment on, you know, we need to go back and set back up boot camps. We need to set back up boot camps and probably have the army or the defense force or somebody set up this boot camp. So once we find these children misbehaving like this, we send them in there for a week or 2 weeks or a month and let them suffer the consequences. That's one aspect.
I hear you on that, and I think that sounds reasonable. Remember, and that is where the problem lies as well. These interventions, whether it be a boot camp or a rehabilitation center or whatever it may be, because of what took place recently with these children at home, it could be kind of hard now for parents to say, look, send my child to a camp there which I have no supervision for, and these things could happen. We don't trust the government institutions to be guardian of our children. And when they compare what took place there for those children, they say, but even though I feel the boot camp would help, in fact, a lot of people confess and say they send their children to these places, and now they're going back again there. So therefore, these boot camp, which I also support, I'm worried that when they go there, they may be abused, both boys and girls. And not only abused sexually, but otherwise as well. So I am not sure if the country itself trusts these government agencies. You know why too? There's no monitoring of what's going on, no measuring, no monitoring, but yet they want to manage in all kind of arbitrary way. So I have a problem, but I agree with you. I endorse these boot camps because that may be putting some measure to make a difference in these children's lives who already done in the state of bad behavior and doing criminal acts.
So we into this challenge. 6 of one and half dozen of the other. 6 of one, the boot camp is a good thing. But half dozen of the other is simply the boot camp could serve as a place for abuse.
Abuse as well.
And everything else. So we have that challenge, all right? But so that's one aspect of it. But then we have a problem. How do we deal with these things? There's been the concern. We can't use police in schools. We can't use police with guns in schools. We can't use police with uniforms in schools. How are we going to treat with these challenges?
And that's why I feel, you know, the government has to be honest and say, look, I cannot meet the demands in terms of resources to deal with it. I want parents, I want volunteers. Let me take them in batches. I take this school. We have, let me sit down. And those students there, about 100 of them, have a problem. They are preventing the other children from studying. Let me have extra lessons or put them on different days or use some measure, but on a customized basis. Don't put the whole Trinidad and Tobago in one umbrella and say, look, suspend them. No. Get the PTA involved and use these children who are not performing well, who are abusive, who are violent and so on, and bring them in a special class with rehabilitation through the PTA or any voluntary organization. But if you expect the government to do all of that from a kind of top-down method, I find that would be a no-no. It will cause more chaos. Let each school try their own thing, but give them the support from the ministry.
So last night a colleague of mine wrote me from Canada to tell me what is happening in Guyana. And in Guyana, for instance, the government has set up some degree of outreach to allow for what they call consultative democracy. In other words, we have to consult with the people. What you are talking about here, for instance, and this is not the singular issue. When we talk about the children's home before, you said we need volunteers. Now you're talking again about volunteers. In other words, we have to have a relationship between government and the people. A social pact, so to speak, where there's that relationship between the citizenry and the government working towards the interests of the society.
I agree with 100%.
And that is a given.
There must be many types of intervention. Don't use one captain fit all. Some people may prefer, look, I have a class of 30 students and about 4 of them are not doing well. I will have them screened properly. I say, look, I'm going to send you to a mechanic shop. I'm going to pay this mechanic owner a stipend every month for you to be under his care. And he might perform there. Why we need to put everybody in a school that you want to be training towards some kind of academic type approach? No. So if I could identify a few people and I could get these shops and so on to take people on a voluntary basis. Apprenticeship basis, right. And pay them something.
Okay, so we need to find mechanisms because clearly we have a problem. And we need to find mechanisms. Now the mechanisms that we have to look at, the boot camps are one thing. The schools cannot provide the kind of security for their students. Should we now charge parents for children who may be breaking the law? That's another option. Then there are the other issues. To what extent can we take now volunteers and put them in schools, and will children respect them? Now these are a whole range of issues. We're going to have to talk about some of these things, but we're going to talk about them after a short break. So we take a break now and come back talking with burning issues. In Trinidad and Tobago, every week there's another issue. Another issue comes to the fore, which is a burning issue for citizens. And on IETV, we will be discussing some of these burning issues from a political point of view, from a social point of view. And then my co-host will also discuss the economic and the medical. Welcome to Burning Issues on IETV, and we will also invite you to participate in the discussions with us.
The economy impacts all of us. Join us weekly as we and our guests ventilate these burning issues.
Stay tuned for informative and exciting stuff.
Welcome back to Burning Issues. And we're talking about school violence and the crisis that we face in our country today. Children are fighting on a daily basis. The question is, what can we do to stop it? Do we simply start arresting some of these students and putting them into prison? Well, of course, the police commissioner would tell us that we need now to ask ourselves whether or not we are doing the right thing. Then there's the other issue here where we will have to ask other kinds of questions. Questions as to whether technical vocational training is the direction in which you should go. Now, we will note full well that in the 1970s and 1980s, when we had the junior secondary and senior secondary schools, most of these schools were built to have technical vocational subjects. Are they really operating now? We remember Minister Garcia, our former Minister of Education, was a woodwork teacher. That's where he started his career in teaching. And the question here is simply one which says, is technical vocational training the way we need to go, where we could segregate and separate some of the children out so that they could get a better education and something that they could feel much more comfortable with? Is our curriculum the issue that we really have to talk about? Because the question is, not everybody's made out to do academics. And question is, are we going to be doing it? And then too, some people have asked me, and some people have actually suggested, you know, this whole problem was Kamla Persad-Bissessa's fault. Because Kamla Persad-Bissessa, when she was Minister of Education, decided all children should go to secondary school. And we stopped the school leaving that we had at post-primary level. And post-primary level, when children didn't pass the common entrance in those days, stayed in post-primary, and they were given a different type of training. And is that the way we should have gone and should be going? And these are all different kinds of ideas.
So you see,
we have to talk about.
The two sides of it, right? The selection process as to who go where, in terms of academics or vocational or an apprenticeship school or something. That's one aspect. Not because you're making a low mark of 10 that you're necessarily violent, right? So in terms of the streamlining of students, that's one area that we can look at to see whether people are happy with the particular streamline they fall into. I'm just taking up with that point, which is that different thing entirely from school violence. But if a child is getting low marks, and I think we get that from the SEA examination, where a large amount of students are making less than 25%. But from your standpoint, do you think those students who make less than 25% are cut out for academics? The answer may be yes, maybe no. But I feel rather than pushing them into a situation where they're in a school setting where they're trying to fight to become getting O-levels in mathematics and English, and so they might be harming themselves more because they're wasting a year or 2 years trying to cope in some area that they cannot.
But then the psychologists will tell us that every child learns at their own pace. And if every child learns at their own pace, not because a child is getting 10 marks now, means that 5 years down the road, they will continue to get 10 marks. They could be a genius.
Exactly. But and that's where teaching at that early age is so important to identify students who may be slow learners and put them in a different category. But if they try to remain, they will just become a nuisance in the classroom and at some point become violent. So at that early age, there needs to really a lot more input from the psychologists, from teachers, from counselors to say, look, I think many schools at Form 3, they decide, well, look, you're going to arts or science or social studies, but between 1 to 3, nobody decided, well, look, you're not fit for no schooling whatsoever, you're going to apprenticeship school, or you're going for a vocational school. There's no kind of screening in that respect. So they end up doing O-levels and failing. So they become a failure. But in terms of school violence, just how we could identify students who may not be the best fit at this point in time to be in this line or that line, we could know students who may be violent oriented or who may have an environment which could make them violent. So how do we deal with that at that primary school level?
And do we take them out of, I mean, how can we take children out of their homes? They come from a violent environment. Does it mean that they will turn out to be violent? I mean, I have students at the University of the West who come from violent areas of the community, but yet still they have succeeded.
Yeah, those are the exceptions, or those are not the norm. But I mean, I hear you that not because you come from a violent home with parents quarreling and so on, that you will automatically be a wife beater or a husband abuser and so on. So therefore, it's really a complex thing. But if we see these things, we should try to deal with the environment as well. So our students out there who have that, we have to have people to go out in these communities and meet them to address some of their social needs, their environmental needs. And I think too much focus on mathematics and language arts and a better communication is not enough to really improve children's welfare at a primary school level or even the secondary school level. We need to go to the environment. If they become violent, now that at the tertiary level, we have to find ways which sometimes we don't have all that resources, whether it's the boot camp or rehabilitation centers or this or that. That's what I think. But
so, all right. So let me come to yet another aspect of it, and another aspect of it. And now, I mean, when I was a child, many years ago, they would tell you that there were officials from the Ministry of Social Development, whatever ministry, would, if they see a child loitering on the roadway or whatever else, they will stop that and ask the child where parents and actually take charge of that child. Mm-hmm. We don't have those sorts of things anymore. Or do we have them still?
I think even if we do have them, and the books is not being enforced because people are afraid to speak to neighbors,
right?
Speak to
and that is why, and that is the context in which the police have, for instance, talked about community policing, where police officers would serve within the context of the community, and people will see them in the community.
But are they trained to kind of look at all these myriad of things, economics and poverty, and you see, I mean, we have litter warden, but litter warden don't really perform because I see litter all over the country, you know, and the littering in front supermarkets, even these business places. So you find all these things in a way create that environment, which I don't think the police is enough to be able to deal with. Just how you're telling me to people loitering. Should the police get involved?
No, and it's different levels of policing. So there's the criminal policing, and then there's the community policing. Oh. So if you put it at community policing level, where you are now saying, here's where the community police, where the police from the community walks the street, people know the police officer, They have respect for the police officer.
Right. I remember when I went to Press Shagwana, Brother Matthew, once you have on a school uniform, if he sees you doing something on the outside which is inappropriate, he call you. Even though you're going home, but he would call you in and discipline you for whatever you do which is inappropriate. Once you're in school uniform, you have to behave in a certain way. But now, I don't think principals or teachers would take that responsibility. I think recently some student beat a principal or a vice principal.
Well, we've been told that is fake news.
Oh yeah, that's a fake news, okay.
Yeah.
So, but that may have happened before, I wouldn't doubt as well, that students beat teachers.
No, but we have had instances within the recent past where female teachers were abused by students. Well, I think in Princestown, if I'm not sure. Okay? And that was a concern where there is that concern where teachers themselves are now wary and afraid of students.
So if we take a whole reformation type approach where you look at children before entering, like how they have Sunday school, you have a kind of education and a general upbringing about social etiquette and whatnot, you know, and make them a better person even before entering school, weekends and whatnot, give them little incentives to behave properly. Would that be a good?
Well, you see, in the old days, in the old days, they would talk about civics.
Yeah.
Which we don't use anymore in schools.
Why?
Right? Well, that's a good question, and we could ask the question why. Of course, now they've reintroducing it or want to reintroduce it. Talk about national service and those kinds of things. Is that the way to go? Now, my question here is, I am very much so concerned, what are we leaving for the generations to come? Because clearly, if they continue on this, the way they go in, we will find ourselves in serious problems.
Yeah. What about the role of the churches and temples and mosques and all these religious bodies in trying to assist in the reformation of students who may be delinquent or with community?
And you see, this is where we now have to ask ourselves, where is this social pact? Where is this national pact? Where we have the government, the private sector, the NGO community, the educational institutions, and the parents all coming together. When you have, for instance, the PTA members fighting amongst themselves, what do you expect of the children? And that is part of the problem.
Yeah, but how do we get children to come out and listen? Because they don't listen to talk shows, they don't go to the temple, they don't go to the church. Mostly the adult people go into these places.
Well, this is where...
So how do we get children to give them the message?
This is where we need to ask now and deal. And this is why I asked early on, and I asked whether we, our generation, are the creators of the problem we have now. Because we don't tell our children to go to church or go to the mosque or go to the temple. We simply said, well, all right, you're doing school work, so we leave you be.
I went to temple Sunday and there were no children.
And that is a concern.
Yeah.
So there is it where we have to deal with some of those issues. And we have to deal with the issues head on. We have to ask our government, we have to ask our NGO community, our civil society, our private sector, our state sectors to all work together. We have to save Trinidad and Tobago. So ladies and gentlemen, this is where we bring the curtains down on today's show. This has been Burning Issues on IETV. We see you again next week. Good evening.